In April of 1841, an announcement was made in Calderon County, South Carolina, that unsettled even the most brutal plantation owners of the region. It was not a declaration of war. It was not a change in law. It was a decision made by a father about his own daughter. Silas Rutledge, a man long considered respectable and practical, publicly declared that he was placing his daughter, Catherine Rutledge, under the complete authority of one of his enslaved men for the duration of 1 year. Not as a nurse, not as a caretaker, not as a medical assistant, but in every way that mattered, except on paper. Catherine Rutledge was 28 years old at the time. Her body was unnaturally heavy, over 250 pounds. Her movements were unstable. Her hands shook without reason. Society had already given her a convenient label, mad. The white society of Calderon County reacted with outrage, discomfort, and gossip. Some called it cruel, some called it shameful, others described it as the desperate act of a broken man. But no one asked the right question. No one asked what Silas Rutledge was truly doing. No one questioned why this specific enslaved man had been chosen. And no one imagined what would follow in the months ahead. By November, 13 men were dead. Cypress Grove Plantation had been reduced to ash. Official records call it an accident. Church archives describe it as the will of God. Family documents refer to it as a tragic but closed chapter. This file is none of those things. This story begins where the air itself felt heavy. Spring in Calderon County was not gentle. It was humid, oppressive. The air pressed against the lungs as if breathing itself required effort. The Combahee River moved slowly through the low country, its dark waters reflecting Spanish moss that hung from live oak trees like funeral drapery. Rice fields stretched for miles. Hundreds of enslaved people stood knee-deep in water from sunrise to sunset, moving in unison. This was wealth, but wealth extracted from suffering. Prosperity here was never measured by morality, only by output. Cypress Grove Plantation covered roughly 800 acres. Not small, not truly great. Its owner, Silas Rutledge, was not considered part of the county's elite, but he was determined to become one of them. He owned 58 enslaved people, enough to be called wealthy, but not enough to be powerful. True power belonged to families who owned hundreds of enslaved people and thousands of acres. Families who summered in Charleston, sent their children north for education, and whose names could alter court decisions with a single word. Silas Rutledge was not one of those names, but he wanted to be. In 1812, he married Elizabeth Yancey. It was not a marriage of affection. It was a calculation. Elizabeth was practical. She kept meticulous records and cared more about margins than reputation. In 1813, she died during childbirth, leaving behind a daughter, Catherine. For 28 years, Silas raised Catherine alone. At least, that is how the story was told. In truth, his attention was focused elsewhere, on influence, access, and power. He was tall, thin in the way of men consumed by ambition. His hair grayed early, his temperament hardened to match. In business, he was known as shrewd but reliable, as long as the agreement served him. Catherine's childhood was isolated, educated by tutors, without friends. Her world never extended beyond the house, and inside that house, at the age of 12, she witnessed something no child could survive unchanged. But no one was told. By 1841, Catherine's body was saturated with medication. Doctors diagnosed hysteria, female nervous disorders. Their treatment slowly poisoned her. She suffered violent episodes, screaming, throwing objects. The year before, she attacked her father with a letter opener, leaving a scar on his hand that never fully healed. Society whispered with false sympathy. Poor Silas, they said, burdened with a mad daughter. No one considered that Catherine was not mad. She was remembering what everyone else had chosen to forget. On April 7, a letter arrived, delivered by private courier, written on expensive paper, sealed with red wax. Silas opened it in his study, expecting financial correspondence. Instead, he recognized the seal immediately. A scythe crossed with wheat stalks, the mark of the brethren of the harvest. 13 men, meeting in darkness, believing land was strengthened through blood. They combined old European traditions with beliefs learned from enslaved people: spirits, power, sacrifice. They believed the strong were meant to consume the weak, sometimes metaphorically, sometimes literally. Silas had been initiated in 1822. Over 19 years, he attended dozens of gatherings, some disturbing, some monstrous. The letter informed him of his debt, $12,000, the result of gambling losses, failed investments, and poor judgment. Repayment would require selling his land and every enslaved person he owned. It would erase him. But the letter offered an alternative, a demonstration of loyalty. Silas was to place his daughter under the complete authority of one enslaved man for 1 full year, and announce it publicly as an extreme medical intervention. The humiliation would be absolute, but his debt would be erased. That night, Silas made the choice society had trained him to make. Property over people, power over morality. He wrote his acceptance by candlelight. And this is where the record truly begins. What followed was not immediate violence. That is important to understand. For the first several weeks, nothing dramatic happened at all. No screams, no chains, no visible punishment. To the outside world, the arrangement appeared to be working. Catherine was seen walking in the upper corridors again. Her fits became less frequent. The servants whispered that she slept through the night for the first time in years. Silas Rutland took quiet pride in this. He invited physicians back to Cypress Grove, not to treat his daughter, but to observe her. Each one reached the same conclusion: improvement. None of them asked how. None of them questioned why the medicines they had prescribed for years were suddenly no longer being administered. Because improvement was all that mattered. Ezekiel understood something the doctors did not. Catherine was not sick. She was poisoned. Laudanum, mercury compounds, sedatives prescribed in escalating doses, year after year. Not enough to kill her, just enough to keep her confused, dependent, silent. He did not stop them all at once. That would have killed her. Instead, he replaced them slowly. Herbs his grandmother had taught him to prepare. Roots to cleanse the blood. Teas to calm the nervous system. Poultices to draw toxins from the skin. The withdrawals were brutal. There were nights Catherine shook so violently that the bed frame rattled. Days when she vomited until there was nothing left inside her. Moments when she begged Ezekiel to give her back the medicine just to make it stop. And every time, he stayed. Not because he was kind, but because he needed her lucid. When her mind finally began to clear, the memories returned with it. Not as fragments, as records. She remembered the cellar, the chanting, the knives, the table stained dark long before blood touched it. She remembered men she had been told to trust. Men who smiled at her in daylight and carved bodies apart at night. And most clearly of all, she remembered her father standing among them, not watching, participating. That was when the plan stopped being about survival and became about reckoning. Catherine began writing again. Not journals, ledgers. Dates, names, symbols, movements. Everything she could remember, encoded in a way that looked like nonsense to anyone else. Ezekiel memorized the plantation's routines. Which doors were locked? Which servants could be trusted? Which nights the house fell completely silent? They spoke little. Walls listened. But every look, every pause, every measured step was preparation. The public announcement came exactly as the brethren demanded. Silas gathered the county's elite beneath the chandeliers of Cypress Grove. Judges, clergy, landowners, men who built their fortunes on suffering and called it civilization. With practiced calm, he explained that his daughter's condition required extraordinary care, that Ezekiel would now oversee her daily life, that this decision was final. The room reacted exactly as expected. Shock. Disgust. Thinly disguised fascination. Catherine said nothing. She smiled. And every man in that room mistook her silence for submission. That was their last mistake. After that night, the brethren grew careless. They believed the threat was contained. They believed Catherine was controlled again. They believed Ezekiel had been reduced to property, doing what property does. They did not notice the small changes. The cellar door opening more often. The absence of certain tools from the barns. The quiet movement of people after midnight. They did not see the network forming beneath them. Because men like that never looked down. The ledger was real. Catherine had not imagined it. Hidden behind a false stone wall, bound in leather, darkened by age and use. Inside were names that should never have been written. Deaths recorded like transactions. Lives reduced to inventory. Ezekiel found his family there. 3 lines, that was all. And in that moment, he stopped believing in mercy. The fire did not start by accident. It started because some truths cannot be exposed safely. Only erased. Only buried beneath ash. When Cypress Grove burned, the county mourned. 13 respected men lost. A tragic gathering. An unforgivable accident. No one asked why no bodies were found intact. No one questioned the smell that lingered near the swamp for weeks. Because asking would have meant looking. And looking would have meant remembering. Catherine Ruddled was declared dead. Ezekiel Cross was listed as sold. The records were clean. Too clean. Years later, people would still whisper about a woman who vanished instead of breaking. About a man who turned knowledge into vengeance. About a night when power failed. But whispers do not appear in textbooks. They survive elsewhere. In fragments. In papers that were never meant to exist. This was only the beginning. Because some records burn. And some are hidden. Waiting. The cellar had always been there. Everyone at Cypress Grove knew that much. It stored food, tools, old furniture. What no one admitted was that the cellar had been expanded. Stonework behind the far wall did not match the rest. One block was newer, cleaner, set slightly out of alignment. Catherine remembered pressing it once as a child, by accident. She remembered the sound it made. The night Silas left for Charleston, the house emptied itself of authority. No overseer stayed awake past midnight. No guest remained. Ezekiel waited until the clock struck 12. Then he moved. The stone shifted exactly as Catherine described. Behind it, a narrow passage opened into a room that smelled of iron and rot. At the center stood the ledger, not hidden, displayed. because the brethren did not believe they would ever be challenged. The pages were methodical: names, dates, locations. Ritual notes written in language that tried to sound academic. This was not madness, it was organization, and that made it worse. Ezekiel did not read everything. He did not need to. He found what he came for. 3 entries, no ceremony described, no justification offered. Just confirmation, that was enough. They did not take the ledger. Not yet. They copied what mattered, slowly, carefully. Because they understood something crucial. If this knowledge surfaced too early, it would be destroyed. If it surfaced too late, it would be meaningless. Timing mattered. They did not hear Silas return. They smelled him first. The oil, the cologne. Authority always announces itself without sound. When the lantern light flooded the chamber, Catherine did not scream. She stepped forward, between her father and the man he believed he owned. That moment told Silas everything. They were locked in the study for hours. Above them, the brethren gathered, no panic, no shouting, only procedure. Because powerful men do not react, they convene. By dawn, the decision had been made. Catherine would be erased, Ezekiel would be tested, and Cypress Grove would be cleansed. The brethren believed in conversion through complicity. If a man committed evil with them, he became theirs. Exposure was impossible. Ezekiel understood this the moment the knife was placed in his hand. The girl on the altar was not chosen at random. She was chosen because she mattered to no one they would answer to. That was the point. Ezekiel did not hesitate. Not because he accepted, but because hesitation would have ended everything. He moved forward, and then sideways. The first strike was not ritual. It was practical. After that, the room became chaos. Candles fell. Voices broke. Authority collapsed under its own softness. The brethren were not warriors. They had outsourced violence their entire lives. Ezekiel had not. The girl escaped. That mattered, because it meant the story could not be fully buried. What Silas did not know, what none of them knew, was that Catherine had never left. She'd been waiting, and she had not been alone. When the cellar filled again, it was not with chanting. It was with memory, with people who had lost sons, daughters, names. No rituals survived that night. No hierarchy remained intact. The ledger burned last. Not in secrecy, but deliberately. Because some records exist only to be ended. Cypress Grove burned for hours. No one attempted to stop it. Men watched from the road and called it tragedy. That word did a lot of work. The official story held. Because it always does. Because it is easier. Catherine Ruddled was buried without a body. Ezekiel Cross vanished into paperwork. The land was sold. The swamp kept its silence. Years later, fragments appeared. Bones found where no graves were marked. A coded journal discovered and lost again. Stories whispered that never matched official timelines. Enough to disturb. Never enough to indict. That is how history survives. Incomplete. Selective. Convenient. This record exists because someone chose not to destroy it. Because someone decided that forgetting was the greater crime. This is not a story about justice. It is a record of failure and what people do when institutions refuse to see. This was the Calderon Papers, where history was never meant to be read.